Okay, we're all good.
All right, thank you. So once again, just want to welcome you all. Thanks for joining me here. I'm going to talk about trying to find a job, basically, some of the practical things that you can hopefully apply in your job hunt to help make your job hunt go more smoothly, help you be more successful. It's really a combination of both the things that I've learned working in HR on the industry side, and also some of my own personal experience in terms of what's worked for me in my job hunt. But you've already been introduced to me, thanks to Isabella previously, so I'm not going to go into that. Basically, again, went to Western, went to U of T, and then I was working at RBC for a few years, did some HR there. And then literally what happened was I was living downtown at the time and walking home from work outside the Rogers Center. And it was during the winter, and I slipped on a patch of ice, and I thought, you know, I'm kind of done with the winter here. I don't want to live in the cold anymore. So I ended up moving to Loma Linda. That's where I am now. And definitely don't have to deal with the snow and the ice so much anymore, but it's just the blazing heat that I have to live with now. So that's kind of how I ended up here. Got a little bit lucky with just a job opportunity opening up with the Loma Linda Hospital and the university out here. And so that's kind of how that all happened. But in terms of what we're going to talk about today, I'll just give you a quick overview of the job application process. This should be fairly self-explanatory or intuitive to you. You might have gone through this process before, but I'm just putting this up because this is going to be a breakdown of what we talk about today. So I'm going to go through all of these different steps and give you some tips and some suggestions on things that you can think about in terms of what you can do during each of these stages to make your life a little bit more easy, I guess. And this presentation just kind of assumes that you kind of already know a little bit about what kind of job you're looking for. But if you're at a point where you're still kind of trying to feel that out, figure out what sort of job you want to go into, what sort of career path you want to take, my suggestions to you would be, first of all, to talk to some of your classmates, see what kind of things they're doing, talk to your friends, try to understand what it is that they see to your strengths to be and where they see you going. Maybe that can be helpful to you. And talk to your professors, talk to your programs, career services department. Most schools have something like that. And so go there and just try to understand what are the different options and routes that are open to you. I'm more focused on the practical nuts and bolts of the job hunting process. So what I haven't talked about so much here is, you know, ideally you should also be praying throughout this whole process to really understand, you know, where it is that God is leading you and what sort of job you could do where God can help to shape you to do more for Him, be it to witness to people or to develop skills that you can then come back and use in service of Him. So, you know, that's another thing to think about. But the focus of today will be more on the practical steps during your job hunting process. So the first thing is, okay, where do I start looking? Oh, yes, question. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but from my screen, I'm seeing the slides on the smaller screen.
On the smaller screen?
Yeah, I can't see it on the main screen either. It's just a black screen.
Let's see here.
So it was hard to kind of read because it was on the smaller screen. So like we're seeing two screens. We have the big black one. There we go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Better? Awesome. Okay. I think it's because if you have a dual screen setup or something like that, Zoom does some funny things. But all right. Well, here we go. Let me know if you run into any other technical issues as we go on. But you didn't miss much on the previous slide, so that's good news. All right, so where to find job openings? I've kind of listed this in terms of sort of effort to reward ratio. the things at the top is where you kind of find the most job openings with the least amount of effort. And so those are the places that I would suggest for you to start looking first. There are a lot of job search engines. They're kind of like Google's for job postings. And I've just listed a few different ones here that you can check out. Google itself sometimes will help you find jobs if you know the title of the job that you're looking for. And then there's also the job bank that's maintained by the government. It's also helpful for you to have a LinkedIn profile. I would just suggest in general for you to create one because it doesn't take a lot of effort for you to do that. As a new grad, you're not going to have too many people hitting you up on LinkedIn for jobs, but gradually as you develop experience in your field, it's very possible and very likely that recruiters will contact you on LinkedIn for job opportunities. Company websites are a great place to look too, if you know what company you want to work for, or if you just have a general idea of the type of company that you want to work for. The nice thing about company websites is a lot of the times they actually have new grad programs that help new graduates get work experience. And sometimes those programs aren't posted anywhere else. They're just advertised on the company website. So you want to check there. But the thing is, if you're in your final year of school right now, it might be too late to apply to a lot of those positions because they tend to start recruiting a little bit earlier in the school year. And so if there's anyone here who's, maybe still in like third year or second year, you can start looking at company websites. I would suggest probably in the fall, like around October, November is when you can start looking. And you might start finding some of them open up their application processes then. Again, a lot of schools will maintain job postings for their students in their career services department. So check there. And your personal network, people always talk about the value of connections and knowing people and all that stuff. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it's true. Your personal network is a very, very powerful resource potentially. Keep in touch with your classmates, keep in touch with your professors if you can, if you have a relationship with them. And you never know where it is that you might find a job opportunity. My first job came up because a classmate of mine who graduated the same year basically knew of an opening in his company. He had done a summer position with his company already, and when he graduated, they hired him full-time. And then within a few weeks of him starting, there was another job that opened up in his department. And I was still looking for a job at the time, and he contacted me and he said, "Hey, are you interested in this? Do you want to come in and interview?" So keeping in touch with your classmates, that's always a good idea. Professional associations, that this may or may not be applicable to you depending on your field of study, but a lot of professions have some kind of like an association that maybe regulates the profession or something like that. And as a student, you can often join it with a student discount. And a lot of the times those professional associations will maintain like a job listing service for their members as well. And so that's something that you can look at if it applies to you. Networking events and job fairs, sometimes these are put on by the community, or they're put on by your school or by a certain company, or maybe a group of companies. You may or may not find success there depending on who shows up. But basically take a look at those opportunities if you hear about them. I don't know how many of these are really happening right now in the COVID era, but they might be doing some of them online and virtually. So it's something to keep an eye out for. But I wouldn't say go to a lot of these, pick and choose, because it is a lot of effort for you to show up to these things. But the advantage of them is, you get to meet someone in person, which is better than a lot of times when you're just submitting resumes and applications into some vacuum and hoping that you get seen somewhere. So that's the advantage of these things. And then finally, you can always drop into places and just like ask them if they're hiring. If you're looking for a job at a big company, if you're looking for a more professional type of job, usually this won't apply. But if you have a specific type of business or industry that you're looking to work in, then this might still apply to you. Like if you're looking to work for a restaurant or for a certain store or for a certain type of clinic and so on and so forth, you can always drop in and just ask them if they're hiring. And so those are the different things that you can consider. Now, in general, there's kind of two routes that your application can take. One is you might be submitting an application online, and the other is you might be submitting your application directly to someone in an email or by physically handing it to them. Again, this is kind of obvious, but I'm listing this so that you know who's going to be looking at your application so that you can make sure that your application is tailored to the process that it's going to go through, so that you know who's going to be reading it, so that you can make sure that whatever you put on your application is going to effectively show who you are to the reader. A lot of the times when you submit an application online, and this is the process that would apply for most job postings for any large company, a lot of the times your resume is initially screened by someone who doesn't really know all that much about the job. They are looking at your resume and the posting for the position and just basically comparing it to see if you have the skills, the experience, and the education. Sometimes it's not even a person, it's like a computer, like an algorithm, or like some sort of machine learning sort of system that's doing this for the company. And so the way that you write your resume, you need to make sure that you have hit the keywords in the job description, in the job posting, that you are showing that you meet the experience or the educational requirements in your application. And the thing is, when it's going through the screening process, usually if it's a manual process, like a person is actually going through every single application, they are only going to give you your application literally a few seconds of their time, because they're just kind of flipping through. So they're skimming through your resume and they're looking for your degree or your certifications. What are your skills? What kind of work experience that you have, really quickly, just trying to see if you hit all of those key things. And then they're making those decisions on the fly like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're applying directly to a person, then there's a good chance that they'll give your resume a little bit more time. But whatever the situation is, again, make sure that you look at the job posting and that your application speaks to how you meet the requirements for that posting. In some cases, you might be asked to do some initial testing, like clerical testing, for example. They might want to test your Microsoft Word skills or Excel or PowerPoint or whatever, or your ability to use a certain system, software, depending on the type of job that you're applying to. So sometimes that's going to be there. And a lot of times you'll also be put through some sort of initial phone screen by someone, again, who doesn't really know what the job does, is not going to be the person who makes the final hiring decision, but they're talking to you just to make sure that you can communicate effectively, basically. And that's the general gist of that first interview. And we'll talk a little bit more about interviews later, but this is kind of the process that you'll be going through for your submission. In terms of a cover letter, cover letters traditionally were used when people would mail, like snail mail, their applications to a job, or literally just show up with their resume, or fax their resume. In this day and age, chances are you'll probably be emailing someone, if not using an actual application, online application system. So your cover letter might be replaced by just your email instead. The purpose of the cover letter is really just to introduce yourself, why you're getting in touch with the person, and basically to make the person want to read your resume. And that's really all it is. Sometimes if you're applying online, you don't need a cover letter. But if the application system asks for one, then, just attach one anyways, because you don't want it to be, you don't want your resume to be weeded out just because you didn't attach a cover letter. That's just a silly reason to be selected, to be excluded based on. So I'd say just attach one anyways. But personally, in all of the hiring I've done, I don't think I've ever actually read a cover letter. I just skip straight to the resume because there isn't that much that the cover letter really tells you. So that's just my take on it. But if you're going to write a cover letter, basically there are three main points that you want to hit. First of all, introduce yourself, why you're getting in touch with that person, how you heard about the job, something along those lines. Summarize very briefly, just in like a paragraph, a short paragraph or less, what your skills and what your experience are that make you a good person for that job. Just enough to create some interest in that person, in the reader, to look at your resume. And then finally, invite the reader to look at your resume, which should be attached, and invite them to contact you for an interview or more information. So that's the general gist behind a cover letter. I'm not going to talk about the templates and the formatting of a cover letter. You can just Google those online anytime, and you'll find plenty of examples in terms of what might work. Just basically keep it clean, keep it professional, and you should be fine. Formatting doesn't really matter as much as some people might make it seem. And I would say the same thing about your resume as well. Format, template, look one up online. As long as it's clean and it gives you the information that you need, then it's fine. But basically, there's three main sections or pieces that you want to include in your resume. First, a summary of your skills. So that could be, what are your soft skills? What are your technology skills? What languages you speak? What, I don't know, certifications you have, any of that type of stuff. That should be listed somewhere. Obviously, your work experience should be on your resume. And then finally, your education as well. And you can always include, like, under your education, any sort of extracurricular things that you did that might be relevant. I'm going to suggest for students, for new grads such as yourselves, generally speaking, to try to limit your resume to one page. And the reason for that is because, again, as I mentioned before, if the person is hiring, they're going through dozens of these applications, if not hundreds. And they're not going to give your resume that much time to flip through multiple pages of your resume. So by limiting yourself to one page, you basically make sure that you put or include the most valuable pieces of information about yourself on that one page. What are the things that are most relevant to the job that you're applying to? Those are the things that should be included. You don't need to go through absolutely everything that you did in school or everything that you did at your previous jobs. So try to do that as much as possible, especially as a new grad, because you're probably not going to have that much work experience to begin with. But gradually over time, as you acquire more experience, then you can start lengthening your resume. But in the meantime, I'd say one page is a good benchmark to just limit yourself to. There's something in resume writing called basically writing a results-oriented or a skills-oriented resume. Traditionally, resumes are written based on kind of the duties that you performed at your previous positions when you're going through your work experience. So you'll describe your duties and what you did and so on and so forth in bullet points. And I mean, I guess that can work, but it's not the best way to do it. If you want to stand out, if you want to show that you have the skills that are required for the job that you're applying for, you should really focus on what are the results, what are the accomplishments that you had at your previous positions. I've included some examples on the slide here. And you know what? Actually, I should say this. I'll email these slides to like, I don't know, to like the ACF Ontario inbox or whatever. And if you guys want to just contact Victoria, if you want a copy of these slides, she can just send it to you. Yeah, like, you know, traditionally your resume would read kind of like a job description of your previous job. And you want to avoid that as much as possible. Instead of just telling someone that you serve customers and assisted them, if you were like a cashier or something like that, you can talk about what differentiated you. You know, were you recognized as my example here, the employee of the month, because you got a lot of good customer feedback. Instead of talking about how you handled customer complaints, mention some of the skills that you use so that you would hit those keywords that kind of pop out when people are reading your resume, or if it's a computer that's screening your resume out. Instead of just saying that you perform some kind of data analysis, write about what you did with that data analysis, where you took it, and what you managed to accomplish with it. And then if you're in some kind of business or accounting field or whatever, you can always include some statistics in there about different things. So these are just some of the things that you can think about when you're writing a resume. Now, moving on to interviews. When you go through an interview process, if you're interviewing with like a large company, and I know we kind of have people in all sorts of different fields and areas of study on the call right now, but generally speaking, if you're applying to a large company, like a hospital or a big retail chain or any sort of technology, banking company, whatever, you're going to go through a process that looks something like this. You're going to have your first screening interview. Often it's with someone in HR, but sometimes it might be the manager just calling you for a quick call, trying to get a little bit of a gauge of who you are. And that's usually a short conversation, 30 minutes, no more than an hour for sure. And again, it's just confirming your work experience, confirming you have the skills that's needed for the job and the education, and then basically a general sense of whether you communicate effectively and whether you'd be a good person to send to a second round interview. After that, if you make it through that first screening interview, you're going to have an interview with the hiring manager. This, in other words, the person who's actually going to make the hiring decision. And they're going to go into a lot more detail. This is someone who's really interested in getting to know you, because this is the person that you're going to have to work with. And then after that, maybe they might just make a decision on the spot or within a week or two on whether to hire you. But sometimes they'll bring you back for another interview after that. And they'll want you to either meet with some of the existing team members or with a more senior manager that's in the organization. And usually if you make it to that step, you're in a pretty good spot, because it means that you're one of the last few candidates that they're considering. There's usually only maybe like 2 or 3 candidates that make it to this last step. And the point of this is just kind of just to choose between the last few people that are still being considered, and to gauge kind of how your chemistry is with the team members, how you get along with them, as well as from a senior management perspective, who they think is the best person for the job. So this is generally the process that you'll go through. Yes, question, John.
Hi, yeah. So for the interview with like the team members,
Mhm.
What sort of job setting would that be from? Like, would it be from a corporate company or like a hospital? Because I've never experienced that sort of interview before.
Yeah, so that's more typical from what I've seen, either of like in more of a business context, either startups or like a large corporation. And in a healthcare setting, kinesiology, right, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for a smaller, either a hospital or a clinic, yeah, probably not going to see that. But you never know. Sometimes, if it's like a really small team and they're really mindful of who they're bringing in from like a chemistry perspective, then it's something that they might include. But you're right that it wouldn't be that common in those industries.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just wanted to know.
Yeah, no problem. Good question. So general tips as you're going through your interview preparation. First of all, again, research the job again that you've applied for and the company that you've applied for. The job, generally speaking, every job that you apply to, I would suggest that you save a copy of the job description in advance. One of the reason for that is sometimes those job postings, they get taken down over time. And by the time you get contacted for an interview, it might not be on the web anymore. And so you're trying to prepare for this interview and you're like, oh, I don't remember what this job is about, because you're probably applying to dozens and dozens of jobs. So save a copy of the job description in advance. If you get contacted for an interview, you can go back and refer to it. Research the company, understand a little bit about them, what their values are, what their mission is, some of the basic stats about them, and so on and so forth, because it might come up in the interview. And it definitely sets apart a candidate who knows a little bit about a company versus someone who has done no research at all. Second thing is anticipate the questions that you're going to be asked. Look at the job posting, look at the skills that are important for that position, and think about what they're going to ask you about. So, you know, if it's a job that requires a lot of customer service, that's going to come up in the interview. So kind of try to guess what those questions are going to be and prepare some responses to them. Because even if the questions don't turn out to be exactly what you expected them to be or what you were predicting them to be, there's a good chance that you can still use some of the responses that you prepared and just kind of change them a little bit on the fly to work with the questions that they're asking you. Always a good idea to practice. If you have a friend or a family member, just sit down, maybe even in a mirror or something like that, just to go over your responses, just so that you can be a little bit more confident and natural in the interview setting. Dress appropriately. This is going to be industry specific. Basically, it's better to be overdressed than underdressed as a general rule of thumb. But some jobs will require you to dress more formally, and others, it's not that big of a deal. But the general guideline that I see a lot of people throw out there is, if you know what the workplace setting is going to look like, dress kind of just one step above that. So if it's pretty cash and people are just wearing like polos and whatever, then, you know, you could probably just show up there in like a nice, like a dress shirt or a blouse or something, and you should be okay. Corporate settings, generally speaking, a full suit is still expected. And this applies even today, even with all the Zoom interviews that are going on these days. Of course, you still want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been interviewing someone over the past year, and they think that because it's Zoom and they're at home, that they're going to dress like they're at home. And so that's not a good idea. If it's an in-person interview, try to budget some extra time to arrive early, find parking, find out exactly where the interview is going to be, because this is definitely one time that you don't want to be late. Common interview questions. The number one interview question that everyone asks pretty much is going to be, tell us a bit about yourself. You're always going to get that question. And it's not even that good of a question, but it's just meant to be a bit of an icebreaker so that the interview has something to get started, to get the ball rolling with. So, you know, you can just kind of prepare your response to that one in advance. There's a 99% chance they're going to ask you that question. And talk a little bit about, you know, your schooling, how you got to where you are today, why you're applying for this job, why you're interested in it, what were some of the experiences that you've had that have led you to this whole position, and also what your future goals are, and how this kind of how this job fits in under that context. So that's kind of how you can tackle that question. It's basically like your elevator pitch. That ties in with the second question about what your career goals are. You know, where do you see yourself in X number of years? And so that is a question that companies will ask you because they want to see if you will stick around with them in the long term, or if you're just literally there for a job and then, you know, a year or two later, you're going to peace out. So be honest about it, but also try to frame it in a way that shows how this current position that you're applying to fits in with your overall career goals in terms of this experience that you're looking to apply or to get, and so on and so forth. Greatest strengths and weaknesses, that tends to come up pretty often. Just pick things that are relevant to the job, especially for your strengths. Pick strengths that are relevant to the position that you think will set you apart. For the weaknesses question, that's always a tougher one. Try to find ones that are also relevant, or at least professionally relevant to the position that you're applying to. And you can just talk about, you know, the fact that you know that this is a weakness, the ways that you're working on improving yourself in those areas, just to show that you're aware of what these are and that you're someone who has a mindset for growing. Why do you want to work for us? Why do you want to work for this position? Again, this goes to this question will kind of just gauge whether you've done your research on the company. And then, do you have any questions for us? That's your chance to ask questions of the interviewer. So it's a good chance to prepare a few things in advance. If nothing else, you can ask the interviews about how they got to where they are today, what their experience was like, because everyone likes to talk about themselves, quite frankly. So you can always ask them that, and at least that shows that you're interested in them or in the position or in the company. The other thing that comes up pretty often are behavior-based questions. So these are the questions. I have a few more examples in the next slide, but they're going to be the ones that are going to say something like, tell me about a time when you did this, or tell me about a time when this happened or that, or something along those lines. General suggestion in terms of the formula or the format that you can take with that response is first, talk about what the situation was, establish the context that is relevant to the question. Then you can talk about the task. What did you have to do in that situation? What was your role in that situation? And then the action is what you actually did, and then what the result or what the outcome was. Hopefully, this is something that you've heard of before in your job preparation, interview preparation, but it has surprised me the number of people who don't respond to these questions using this format. And because of that, they don't even really answer the question. And you're like, okay, the interviewer then kind of has to try to fish out more information from the candidate. So if you include all of these things, then you're probably going to be in a pretty good spot in terms of how you respond. You don't really need to spend too much time in your response, maybe 1 to 2 minutes if you're preparing something in advance, just as a general rule of thumb. You don't want to go on and on, because then you lose the focus and the attention of the interviewers. And if you're stumped, it's okay to just take a step back, take a deep breath, and think about your response a little bit, and just let them know, oh, this is a tough question. Is it okay if I just think about it for a moment? And it's always going to be okay. No one expects you to be able to answer every question on the spot. So just get a little bit comfortable with that awkward silence for a few minutes. So I've just thrown a few examples of behavior-based questions on here. Tell me about a time when you unintentionally upset someone, or when you resolved the conflict, or when you took on a leadership role, and so on and so forth. You can Google a lot more of these, and you'll find articles where they'll give you some more examples if you want to prepare. But it's a good idea to just kind of take a look and work on your responses to a few of these questions that you think might be coming up in that interview. Because you'll see with some of these questions, when you respond to one of them, or when you prepare a response to one of them, they actually might work for a few different questions. So when you unintentionally upset someone, that's also a time when you potentially may have needed to resolve a conflict, or that may also be a time when you disagreed with a colleague. So when you prepare a response to one of these questions, you might actually be able to use that same example or that same story for multiple questions, depending on what comes up in the interview. But of course, only use the example once in your interview. You don't want to go back to the same example over and over, because then it shows that you don't have anything else to talk about. But yeah, it's a good idea. That's why it's a good idea to prepare your responses to these questions in advance. Video interview tips. This is kind of more pertinent today because we live in the era of Zoom and video conferences. Make sure you have your software and your hardware tested in advance. Make sure everything's working. Make sure you have a stable internet connection. I have had people try to do Zoom interviews in the parking lot on their cell phones in their car, and their cellular connection has cut out on them numerous times and they disconnected. And needless to say, none of those people got hired. So make sure wherever you are that you have a good, reliable connection. Check your lighting. Make sure that you look good on video. If you have all these shadows on your face, it's not going to present you very well. So just make sure you're well lit. And then the last thing is, as much as possible, look at the camera and not your screen, because sometimes you're tempted to look at the reactions of the people who you're talking to, but more naturally, you should be looking at the camera. So there's a difference between me looking at my screen, which is what you can see right now, versus me looking at the camera, which is a more natural eye contact sort of situation. Finally, salary. Salary is going to come up twice in your hiring process. The first is it's probably going to come up in your interview if they ask you what your salary expectations are. And then it's going to come up in the job offer process. The first thing you want to do is make sure you do your research in advance to understand what that position generally pays in the market. You can try Google, you can try Glassdoor, Indeed, Canada StatsCan sometimes has data, stuff like that, just to get a general idea of what the position pays for. You might be surprised at Reddit. Sometimes people talk about how much they make at a certain company. So that's a place that you can check too. So that's something you can look for. You can provide a range and just be flexible with that. And it never hurts to try to negotiate, even if you're a new grad. Always ask, hey, is this negotiable? And if it's not, the worst they can say is say no. So it's not a big deal. Anywhere up to around 10% more than whatever they offer you to begin with, you can probably realistically aim for that. And so that's pretty much it. And I have a thing that says that breakout rooms will close in 20 seconds. So I should have left more time for questions, but what you guys can do, if you want to just like chat a question or something like that, I'll try to find a way to respond to you. Yeah, sorry guys, I should have left a little bit more time. But just send me a question on Zoom.